Heroes.
Greetings, gamers. It's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and if you've been following gaming news at all, particularly when it came to all the announcements that came out of the Game Awards, then you've probably already seen this trailer from Sega, which I'll start playing here without the sound so I don't get dinged. Sega was hyping this up before the award show, and as you can notice, is some arcade goodness there in the background with something that looks like a Shinobi cabinet, as I recall. But yeah, Sega made a big announcement that they are on Crazy Taxi there, bringing back their old energy as a new energy. And in an interview, I think it was the CEO of Sega said that they're trying to recapture that energy that they had in the era of the Dreamcast. I mentioned on the blog that I find that one slightly strange, just because I get what they mean by the having the Dreamcast energy. It's just at the same time that is where Sega failed. And so to me, what makes maybe a little bit more sense is the Sega Genesis energy, or the 90s arcade Sega energy, particularly mid 90s, like when they were riding high off of Daytona. But whatever, it's fine. Still, they announced these new games, many of which got their start in arcades, such as Crazy Taxi and Shinobi and Golden Axe, and more. That there is a little bit more information as to what Sega is planning to do with these, but I wanted to address it on my channel, even though these are all console games. Obviously, some people are asking, will these come to arcades? Well, the answer, unfortunately, seems to be no, and that may require a little bit of explanation. But let's look a little bit of the evidence first, and then I'll let you know what I know at this point from Sega on the side. So here is an image shared by Ted on the Arcade Heroes Discord, where I didn't catch when he said this was published, but it wasn't long ago. But it shows Sega's current strategy as to what they plan on doing with their IP. And I mean, we all know the IP. It's very much into gamers from the 80s and 90s and all that, but I do wonder how much this really appeals to brand new gamers. Gen Z, I guess, is what they're being called now, or Gen Alpha, whatever. But yeah, a lot of them, like my kids, don't have any interest in Jet Set Radio and Golden Axe and Afterburner and Shinobi and Crazy Taxi and Outrun and all that stuff. Not even really Total War. They would know Sonic, of course, but they just haven't shown much interest in a lot of this other IP. But anyways, as you can see from their branding strategy, their marketing strategy, there are all these different aspects of entertainment there, and which one is missing? Arcade machines. And so CS, PC, CS would be console games. With mobile games, they have that highlighted with Rovio, but they've shown interest, since they have been successful with Sonic the Hedgehog, as to applying some of these other IPs into movies and other things, to even comic books, Crazy Taxi comics. Although, at least for what I've heard lately, the comic industry is not doing that great right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if they don't really go in that route and focus on some other ones that perhaps render better returns. But beyond that, there was this tweet from Gematsu that talks about more Sega trademarks have been filed, particularly for Alex Kidd, Afterburner, Crazy Taxi, House of the Dead, Outrun, Shinobi, Streets of Rage, and Super Monkey Ball. Now, all of these games have existed in the arcade space, either as afterwards. I think Alex Kidd was through Sega's Mega Play platform, which was kind of like their version of Nintendo's Play Choice. But like Afterburner and Crazy Taxi, House of the Dead, Outrun, Shinobi, those all got started in arcades. And so if you go click onto those and go run it through a translator, this is what you see. And so with the trademark, what it is related to as far as which products and services, from the translation, there is nothing here that hints at arcade. Coin operated gaming devices is generally what that would show up as. But instead, we have household TV game machine program, aka console games. Interesting that they mention optical discs and magnetic discs and ROM cartridges. Like Nintendo Switch would probably fall under ROM cartridges. That let's see here. I guess you still have like the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 with the discs, so that would explain that one there. But mobile phones, even speakers and headphones, computers, computer game program, computer software, mobile phone game program, computer game software, computer program that can be downloaded over the internet. And this is particularly for House of the Dead, but it's the same across the different ones. And so no indication at all from Sega as to them going this route on the side of arcades. Now, recently, if you've been following my channel, you saw that I've posted some Sega footage from what's called Sega Amusements. And there was a big trade show recently that's called IAPA, and IAPA Expo 2023, where Sega Amusements appeared and had a big booth. While they have the Sega branding, they have Sonic the Hedgehog as a statue there. There wasn't anything at the booth that had any of these IP attached to it. And from my discussions with Sega employees there's also been no indication. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't happen, that one of these titles might not find its way over to arcades at some point, but it's pretty clear that Sega's strategy right now is to get these IPs rebooted, remade for consoles first, possibly mobile phone or mobile gaming devices. And then maybe if they're really successful, perhaps there could be something done with arcades there. I mean, now several years ago, back I think it was 2016, Paul Williams, the CEO of Sega Amusements, did state that they were looking into doing Outrun 3, but, we're several years later and still no Outrun 3 in arcades. In fact, instead, they have Apex Rebels, which does have a lot of energy from Sega's 90s arcade racers like Daytona USA, Scud Racer, and maybe a little bit of Outrun there, but not so much more Daytona like. But here's another thing that's important to understand when it comes to Sega and Sega Amusements. So I ran a story a while back around the time where there were still lockdowns taking place in Japan, and Sega was selling pieces of themselves off. They sold their arcade operations division to a company called Genda, where they have rebranded those into Gigo arcade locations. And Sega's arcade division, where they had employees like AM1, AM2 sort of thing, over in Japan, they basically folded those and merged them into the console side. Now, what happened with Sega Amusements? And Sega Amusements has been operating semi-independently since 1983. And this is a company that was essentially born out of Sega and Gremlin. That, if you look at some late 70s, early 80s arcade games like Zaxxon and Head On and some others, you'll see the Gremlin logo. And so Sega Amusements is essentially a new entity that was created in 1983 out of those. And they've been operating kind of on their own, but what happened in 2021, 2022 around there is that Sega Amusements, did what's called a management buyout. And so right now, the company that calls itself Sega Amusements that still releases arcade games in North America, Europe, and most of basically the entire world except for Japan is a company known as Kaizen Entertainment, where they are essentially licensing the Sega name for use in what they do. But it was interesting to see at IAPA 2023 that there were banners showing Kaizen Entertainment very prominently. Like, I had not seen that before. And so could they one day stop being Sega Amusements? I assume, yeah, they could. I don't think it would necessarily be in their best interest to do so because of just how much power and goodwill come with the Sega name. And there's possibly some of you that follow Sega Amusements on their social media. Would you still follow them if they weren't Sega anymore? Possibly not. But I guess that's an individual decision on each one. But either way, you know, even in Japan, Sega's arcade output is very much diminished from where it had been. Like they did just announce a new version of is it Tunathim, a rhythm game over there. They've been supporting Initial D, again, just over there. They have a digital distribution service for arcades called All.net Plus Multi, which is also known as APM3. And so there's been some support there, but again, it's been cut down significantly from where it was, say, in 2019 or in 2018 when they did House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn. So really what I'm trying to say here is when it comes to these new games and this new energy that Sega's bringing, so even though they obviously acknowledge that the arcade history that they have, there's no indication that I've heard of from Sega Amusements employees or anyone else, or from the evidence as we just looked over, that these games are intended for arcades, but instead they're heading to consoles. And of course, something like this Golden Axe here and how Shinobi looked, like a lot of that's just not tailored for what works in an arcade. As I have mentioned many times before, that you cannot just take a console game, add a thing to take credits, and call it a day. You need to make sure the game has to be tailored for an arcade environment where people are expecting fast play, and they can't go farming items. That just does not work. You can't have lots of text and the game taking a while to give you a tutorial and all that stuff. I mean, yes, you can do tutorials, but they have to be skippable, and the game has to be understood so quickly that that's where tutorials oftentimes just a game that requires a tutorial, I should say, doesn't work very well because you need the people to pick up on it instantly. And that's why light gun games and racing games work so well, because you don't really need to know what you're supposed to do. You don't have to be taught that you're supposed to just drive and get to the finish line first in a racing arcade game, because you have a steering wheel there, you have the foot pedals. But when you have, say, a joystick, it can go in any number of ways, and that's where joystick games traditionally, or at least these days, don't perform as well, don't make as much money in the arcade, which is what matters for these machines to sell and to get into arcades, because arcade operators like myself, we look at earnings a lot of the time. And yes, I will look at other aspects of the game, and I know some other operators who don't just look at earnings, but at the same time, when you're spending thousands of dollars for a game, you have to know that it's going to pay itself off. You don't want to spend money and throw it away on something that's going to be a dud. And unfortunately, with a lot of joystick games, that's just kind of where they go. And like even games that have a big name attached to them, like I have a couple sitting here on the other side of the camera, like Minecraft Dungeons Arcade and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they've done okay, but they've never been my number one game. Like I have a Jurassic Park Arcade by Raw Thrills, a gun game that came out in 2015, and it regularly still beats any new joystick game that I have. And it sucks that that's the reality, but if any of these games were to come to the arcade, they would need something on them, to some sort of gimmick, some sort of cabinet feature, some way to stand out, as well as content, of course, because another issue I've seen with Minecraft Dungeons is even though the gameplay is entirely different from the home console version, I overhear a lot of parents where the kids are freaking out. They're like, "It's Minecraft! And Minecraft, I want to play it!" And then the parents are like, "We have Minecraft at home." And I think that's also hindered it too, even though it has the cards, and again, it's a different thing. But yeah, it just doesn't help. But if it had some sort of control gimmick, or maybe I think at this point a different name, like in Minecraft Adventure as opposed to Dungeons, then that might help it. But anyways, that is the situation with Sega. Would I like to see these games make their way back to arcades, or these franchises make their way back? Absolutely. I mean, some of these games are awesome, and particularly I'm into beat 'em ups. That's just one of my genres that I enjoy. I wouldn't mind seeing, but again, they would need to be different than what they look like in this video, because you can't like stand around and go exploring very much. And of course 2D platformers are also a somewhat difficult thing to do, or like this style of Golden Axe, I don't think that would work very well in an arcade environment. You would want to make it more like a side scrolling beat 'em up like the original was, but with those types of graphics that would be awesome. But let me know what you think about all that, and hopefully that might clear it up in case you have been curious, where is any of this coming to arcades. I mean, again, I am more than happy to eat my words if they are, in fact, working on some of these behind the scenes, but there's just no evidence that bears it out at this point. So maybe by 2026 or something, we might see something along those lines. But yeah, let's Sega talk. Um, if you haven't caught recent videos on what Sega's bringing to arcades through Sega Amusements, check my channel here and stay tuned for more arcade goodness. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.